It's that time of the year again. The college football playoffs are right around the corner, and it's time to look at every team's path to the playoffs. I believe there are 43 teams with a chance to make it, and I know you're probably sitting there thinking that's absolutely ridiculous. But if you stick around, I think you'll agree with me, even if some of their chances are beyond insane. If you weren't here last year, I'm going to separate every remaining team into 5 categories every single week until we know the playoff picture. The categories are Mortal Lock. Basically, this team could throw a JV team out there and lose all of their remaining games by 100 points each and still make it. Next is Lock Barn Collapse. These teams are coasting to their locked up playoff positions, but if a catastrophe the likes of the Penn State implosion happens, they could still technically be left out in the cold. Control Their Destiny. If these teams win all of their remaining games, usually including their conference championship, they're in. But slip up once and things could get messy. Need a Little Luck. They're on the cusp. Winning out doesn't necessarily guarantee them anything, but these teams are absolutely worth keeping an eye on as they're still in the hunt. And lastly, a place no team ever wants to find themselves, Prey. It's really the hope that kills you with these teams. They're basically in college football purgatory, where even if they win the games they need to win, there is still so much outside of their control that some of them need a mini miracle every single week to stay alive. Alright, enough messing around, let's jump right into it. Starting in the Mortal Lock tier, we have no one. With 3 to 4 games left for most teams, it's still possible for anyone to take on too much water and sink before the playoffs. So Lock Barn Collapse is where we're going to start this week. Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, Alabama, and Ole Miss. I'll breeze through most of these as we all should know why they're here. OSU is the reigning national champion and they're the favorites to repeat for good reason. They've been number 1 since they took down a slightly overrated Texas team in week 1 and will be looking to hold on to that until the end of the year. Their road isn't overly difficult, with Michigan being the only team I can see challenging them, and we all know what can happen in that matchup. Not a whole lot to say here. Heisman favorite quarterback, stud wide receivers, and a terrifying defense. Unless they all simultaneously forget how to play football, expect to see them secure a bye in the playoffs. Moving over to their Big Ten counterpart, we have Indiana. Apparently last year was not a fluke, and Curt Cignetti really just is that guy. As an Indiana fan, I have to pinch myself watching this team, as it was just 2 years ago I was in Bloomington watching them go to quadruple overtime with Akron. Now they can go into Autzen Stadium and compete with the big boys. This team is just flat out better than last year. Fernando Mendoza seems to be a major upgrade from Curtis Rourke, and Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. have developed into one of the best wide receiver tandems in the country. Their schedule looks extremely manageable as well. I could ramble on and on and on about this team, but seeing as we have 41 more to go through, I'll leave you with this. 2 years ago, this school would take their team photos when Ohio State came to town, because it was the only time their whole stadium would be filled with red. Now it's likely that's who they're going to play in Indianapolis for the Big Ten Championship. Pretty cool. Heading south, we have Texas A&M with potential Coach of the Year Mike Elko at the helm. It seems that finally this team has broken through from an above-average SEC school to contender status. And I'll be the first one to say I was a major doubter. I thought this team had a lucky win against a sluggish Notre Dame team at the beginning of the year, and I'm here to apologize to the Aggie fans. I was not familiar with Marcel Reed's game. In case you missed it, A&M marched into Death Valley in their last game and ripped LSU apart so badly that the Tigers are now paying the man who coached that game $54 million to never coach for them again. Marcel Reed threw a couple picks, but this guy is the definition of a dual threat quarterback. If teams can't contain his running, he's a nightmare to deal with. The Aggies are undefeated with some tough-ish matchups still to come at Missouri and at Texas, but this team would feel disappointed to miss the SEC championship, and it would be an outright disaster if they somehow fell out of the playoffs. Next up in Lock Barn Collapse, we have Alabama. A fitting team for this category considering they very nearly collapsed against South Carolina in their last game. A loss there would have made things very interesting for the Tide, but they got it done, and now they find themselves in a pretty good spot. Ty Simpson has a very good argument for best quarterback in the country, but I am extremely concerned about their running game. This part of their game got exposed against South Carolina, where running back Jam Miller only averaged 2.6 yards per carry. Don't get me wrong, South Carolina has a solid defense, but it's a major issue when a title contender is 14th out of 16th in the SEC in rushing yards per game. They've been able to rely on Ty Simpson, but if they get into a game where he just isn't clicking, it could get dicey fast. Either way, it seems like Alabama is through the worst of their schedule with just the one loss. Now looking ahead to LSU with an interim head coach, Oklahoma at home, the quarterback producing powerhouse that is Eastern Illinois, and now a coachless Auburn. The Tide should roll to the playoffs. Lastly, in this category, we have Ole Miss. Why the jump from the top 4 teams to number 6? Schedule. Ole Miss just got beyond South Carolina and are now looking down at this schedule. For the SEC, this is about as easy as it could get. The Citadel should basically serve as a bye week. Sorry, Citadel fans, if you even exist. Florida is currently coachless, and although the team is talented on paper and shocked a few schools, you should be winning this game at home if you have playoff aspirations. Then they have Mississippi State, who has quietly been more solid than usual, but they're still 1-4 in the SEC, so it's again one a team Ole Miss's caliber should be beating. They could probably even afford to drop one of these games and still sneak in, as we saw every 2-loss SEC team make it last year. So that wraps up lock barn collapse. Expect most of these teams to move into mortal lock in the next week or two. As I mentioned, they're really only back here for now just because of the number of games left to be played. But when that drops to 2, the undefeated teams will move up, assuming they don't fall on their face beforehand. Alright, enough about those powerhouses, and I guess also Indiana. Let's move into the teams that control their own destiny, starting with Georgia. You could very easily make an argument that Georgia belongs in the tier above. Hell, I mean, they beat Ole Miss and have the same record as them, with their only loss coming against Alabama by 3. ESPN is even giving them better odds to make it, but for me, it all boils down to who they play. They just had a massive scare against Florida with some pretty questionable calls going in their favor. Looking ahead, they play Mississippi State, same as Ole Miss, but then it deviates when they play a sneakily hot Texas team who has won their last 4, with 2 of those coming against ranked opponents. Charlotte should give them a little break, but then we have Georgia Tech. I know everyone is probably familiar with the Yellow Jackets this year as they just lost their undefeated streak, but last year they took Georgia to 8 overtimes with a worse team. This game will not be a gimme for the Bulldogs either. The one thing working in their favor is that Georgia Tech gave up home field advantage in this game and took a payday to move it to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. But still, this is a sneaky hard end of the year. Luckily, they can drop 1 and they will still be in, but lose 2 of these, and it would take a miracle for a spot to open up. Now let's look at Oregon. Again, a team sitting in a pretty decent spot currently with their only loss coming against Indiana, but looking down the barrel of what should be a very tough finish to their season. At Iowa this weekend is a game no one should be overlooking. Iowa is 4-1 at home this year, with their only loss also coming against Indiana. But the Hawkeyes played the Hoosiers even closer than the Ducks did and arguably should have won that game. Definitely keep an eye on this game, as it should be a good litmus test to see if Oregon is a team that can actually win big games this year. After Iowa is Minnesota, which shouldn't be too difficult, but then they wrap up the season at home against USC and away against Washington. A lot of people are questioning this Oregon team, whose best win is Penn State, and they really have a perfect opportunity to shut a lot of people up. They should be favored in just about every game they play, but it won't be by a lot. Oregon can probably afford to lose one of these 4 and still get in, but with the Big Ten Championship all but looking like it'll be between Indiana and Ohio State, this team doesn't have a whole lot to fall back on. Switching over to the ACC, we have Virginia and Georgia Tech. 3 weeks ago, if you told me Virginia was going to be in the front seat of the ACC over the likes of Georgia Tech and Miami, I would have called you absolutely nuts, but that's the world we find ourselves in today. This team has flown under the radar up to not only being a playoff hopeful, but the team with the best odds to make it out of the ACC. They lost to NC State in their second game, but have been winning ever since, probably giving their fans multiple heart attacks in the process, going to 3 overtimes in just 4 weeks against Florida State, Louisville, and UNC. It is kind of a miracle looking at the remaining schedule that they happen to just miss Miami and Georgia Tech. as they're the only undefeated team left in the ACC. Wait, how can they be undefeated in conference play when they lost to NC State in their second game? I hear you ask, naively. Oh, well, that was just their non-conference conference game, of course. Joking aside, it's pretty dumb that some of these teams are forced to schedule out-of-conference games just to protect their rivalries within the same conference because conference realignment has been such a mess. You don't understand it, I don't understand it, that's just the way college football works now. Luckily for Virginia, that means if they win out, they're in the ACC championship with a chance to punch their ticket to the playoffs. It also means they could afford to drop a game and still make it, but this would put them in a pretty awkward spot as there are 5 teams hot on their heels with just one conference loss. For now, Virginia fans, just take each game one at a time, because your fate is still in your hands. Georgia Tech just blundered their perfect season to NC State, and this game really shows us that even when their star quarterback Haynes King is playing at an extremely high level, they're still a very vulnerable team due to the weakness of their defense. Letting up 48 points to NC State and nearly 600 yards is just unacceptable, and way below the quality you need to make it to the playoffs. Luckily for Georgia Tech, they are still in the race. Winning out no longer guarantees them a playoff spot in the ACC championship, but if they were to win out and miss it, their resume should be strong enough to still get in, especially with that last game coming against Georgia. Also, I feel like now is a pretty good time to mention it, but I believe that a team will have to be ranked in the top 10 in the final rankings to make the playoffs. We know that the 5 highest ranked conference champions will make it, which will invariably be the winners of the SEC, the Big 10, Big 12, ACC, and the Group of 5 conference. I know it's the Group of 6 technically with the Pac-12, but Group of 5 just sounds cooler, and honestly, screw the 2 teams in the Pac-12. Anyway. Because the highest ranked ACC team is currently 14th in the CFP poll, and no Group of 5 teams are even ranked, we can currently make the assumption that likely 2 teams outside of the top 12 will eat up 2 of these automatic spots. Meaning if your team is ranked 11th or 12th in the end, they're going to be left out in the cold to make room for the champions. I probably explained that pretty poorly, but for future reference, just know that a lot of these teams that are vying for non-automatic spots should be aiming for a top 10 finish to get in. Alright, now let's look at some teams from the Big 12. Undefeated BYU, recently defeated Cincinnati, and Texas Tech. We can start with BYU as they're the last undefeated team in conference play. Last year they were in this exact same spot, and if you don't remember, they absolutely fell apart and missed the playoffs. So they're going to be hoping to not have a repeat of that fiasco, but it's going to be very tough, as they play both Texas Tech and Cincy before the season ends. They're massive 9.5 point dogs this weekend in Texas, so it's very likely they could fall. But even with a loss, they would still be alright because they'd be in a 3-way tie for first in the Big 12, as Cincinnati doesn't play this weekend. However, their wiggle room would be gone, and they would have to win out to ensure a spot in the Big 12 championship. Texas Tech, we mentioned, plays BYU this weekend, and it's easily their biggest game of the year. With a win, they solidify themselves not only as a Big 12 championship contender, but as an at-large bid contender as well come playoff time. With a loss, they could all but kiss their season goodbye, as they would be grouped with teams like ASU and Utah, and more than likely need tiebreakers to work out in their favor. If you're a Red Raider fan, the game this weekend is all that should be on your mind. And then there's Cincinnati. Cincinnati, honestly, what the hell, guys? I know you were massive underdogs against Utah, but that was just embarrassing. Luckily, you get to play BYU, as we said, so winning out gives you the tiebreaker on them no matter what, and books your spot in the Big 12 championship. But lose any of these pretty tough last 3 games, and it's bye-bye Bearcats. Alright, moving swiftly along, let's talk about Notre Dame. Notre Dame mainly benefits from its brand recognition and their initial preseason AP ranking of 6th. This high ranking allowed them to stay in the top 25 despite starting the season 0-2. The first team to stay ranked at 0-2 since 1988. USC at home is a solid win, and they've belted some other decent opponents like Arkansas and Boise State. But I really don't know if they've beaten anyone to prove they should be in the playoffs. Their remaining strength of schedule is pretty abysmal at 70th in the country, and they don't have a conference championship to fall back on. They need to win out to make it, period. But that shouldn't be overly difficult with this schedule, although Pitt has been on an absolute heater recently. As much as everyone, myself included, is going to moan about their schedule and strength of record, The committee will 1000% include this team if they finish with just 2 losses. Speaking of 2 losses, let's look to Texas and Oklahoma. 2 teams currently ranked 11th and 12th in the new college football playoff rankings respectively, meaning they're the first 2 teams out for the time being. However, their remaining schedules are so difficult that if they were to win out, they would easily jump Notre Dame. And with BYU and Texas Tech playing each other this weekend, they would jump the loser of that as well. And wrapping up this category, let's look at some group of 5 teams: Memphis, Navy, and North Texas. It's pretty difficult to point to a leading group of 5 team as none of them find themselves in the CFP poll, but if I were a betting man, which I guess I kinda am, I would say it's Memphis. They're the only team ranked in the AP poll, they're seemingly in the strongest group of 5 conference, and the American Conference has a tiebreaker of CFP ranking, which seems to be favoring them even if they aren't in it at this point. Looking at their schedule though, it's tough, but they should be favored in all of their remaining games. Their biggest game is likely this weekend with Tulane, which should answer a lot of questions. Now, Navy is an interesting team. They just lost to North Texas in a game that really could have boosted their chances, but looking to the rest of their schedule, it's really damn difficult. 26.5-point underdogs at Notre Dame this weekend. South Florida, Memphis, talk about a gauntlet. Their only true hope is winning out, and as much as I would love to see a military academy make it to the big dance, I think the ball drops for them this Saturday in South Bend. North Texas just rained on Navy's parade, but they arguably would be a way cooler story if they made it to the playoffs. Their quarterback, Drew Mestemaker, was a walk-on with no offers, had not started a game since 9th grade, and mostly played safety and punter in high school. He somehow won the starting job and has led the Mean Green to an 8-1 record. Their only loss came to USF, which isn't great for their American hopes, but they still make the championship if they win out. And honestly, the road doesn't look too difficult. They'll be favored in all 3 of these games with this weekend off. And barring some terrible slip-up, they should be in the American Championship, which will 100% have a really solid team waiting for them. But a win there, and they would be the group of 5 team in the playoffs. Alright, I know it's a lot to take in, it's a lot for me to even say, but just know every team we've talked about so far controls their fate. Obviously, many of them will screw it up spectacularly, and then we'll all come back and laugh at them, but we'll have to see who it is. Alright, now let's talk about the teams that need those screw-ups to happen. Vanderbilt had the world on a string, but just couldn't get it done against Texas and no longer control their destiny. Their SEC odds are borderline non-existent, so winning out and hoping for a few results elsewhere is the way to go here. They're going to be favored in their next 2 against Auburn and Kentucky, but Tennessee will be tough in Neyland. As I mentioned, every 2-loss SEC team made the playoffs last year, which, is a pretty small sample size, but they would be unlucky to be left out if they win all 3 of these games. Missouri is another team that only has 2 losses, but they would be hard-pressed to hold on to that. Can I just say that it's absolutely insane this team had their first 6 games at home this year? How does that even happen? Anyway, they've lost 2 of their last 3, and it doesn't get much easier for them with upcoming games against Texas A&M and Oklahoma. Being ranked 22nd, it's win out or nothing, and I just can't see that happening with this schedule, but I guess crazier things have happened. Alright, let's really start rifling through some teams here. Louisville and Duke. Despite having records of 7-1 and 5-3 respectively, they have relatively similar odds to make the college football playoffs. If these teams win out, they're practically guaranteed to make the ACC championship, as Duke plays Virginia, where a win would give them the head-to-head tiebreaker over them, and both Duke and Louisville currently hold great tiebreakers over the other 1-loss ACC teams in conference opponent record. Quick side note, you've probably realized that there are a ton of different tiebreakers for every single conference. And believe me, there are. I'll mention what they are when they come up, but a lot of them, like conference opponent record, are extremely confusing and really hard to project, so I won't delve too deep into some of them to save time. But just know, Louisville and Duke are sitting pretty amongst the 1-loss ACC teams. SMU and Pitt are in this same category, but they just have worse odds due to their lower standing when it comes to some of those tiebreakers. SMU will have the chance to knock off Louisville and improve their ACC odds, while Pitt has to run the gauntlet to have a chance. Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, and Miami. If they win out, there's a chance they could still miss the ACC championship, but these wins would probably give them a good enough resume to have their name in the hat when the end of the year comes. Both these teams would much rather prefer slip-ups from teams like Louisville, Duke, Georgia Tech, and Virginia, because the ACC championship is really the best bet they have. The last team in the ACC with any sort of chance is Miami. A stumble against Louisville a few weeks ago was disappointing but still manageable, but their most recent outing against SMU has sent this team into desperation mode. They are basically dead in the water in the ACC with 2 conference losses, but there is still hope for an at-large bid. Their Week 1 win over Notre Dame is going to come in handy for an argument to be over them if it's between the 2 teams with 2 losses. And the rest of their schedule is manageable. They should have 2 losses going into Pitt, which could prove to be a huge game for both teams to wrap up the season. If Miami finishes with 2 losses, they'll either barely sneak in or be one of the first teams out. For now, and for most of the teams from here on out, chaos above is their best friend. Moving over to the Big Ten, we have USC, Iowa, Washington, and Michigan. Originally, I had Iowa and Washington in the tier below, but the college football playoff rankings really worked out in their favor, so they jump up with these teams. A loss for any of them kills their chances, as no 3-loss Big Ten team has a shot in hell of making it this year. So let's look at their schedules. They all have at least one critical game. Oregon for USC, Iowa, and Washington, and Ohio State for Michigan. These games will serve as an opportunity to show the committee that they can compete, and it'd be very hard to deny a 10-2 Big Ten team by the end of the season. There's not a ton of precedent to go off of, as last year Ohio State was the only 2-loss Big Ten team, and obviously they made it. My guess would be that a 2-loss Big Ten team should jump Notre Dame due to their weak schedule, and they would just need a few other teams to slip up in the progress, but it's honestly hard to say with the College Football Playoff Committee ranking Notre Dame so highly. All 4 of these schools are very much in it. As I've said before, pay close attention to Oregon at Iowa this weekend, which will have massive consequences on both teams' playoff campaign. Looking at the last Power Conference team in this tier, we have Utah. Maybe the biggest winner from the CFP poll, they jump from 17th in the AP to 13th now. A huge leap that will help their cause a ton should they finish strong. With 3 Big 12 teams in the top 13, it's not off the table for this conference to produce 2 bids, which would squeeze other conferences like the Big 10 and SEC more tightly. Utah is very much in the backseat for the Big 12 championship after losing to Texas Tech and BYU. But looking at the rest of their schedule, it's really all games they should be winning. It is still likely that even if they win these games, it doesn't give them enough of a push into the top 10. So they'll be hoping for a lot of the 12 teams above them to crash and burn, making room for Utah to climb higher. Let's finish this tier with South Florida and James Madison. USF was the group of 5 darling until they lost to Memphis. Now, winning out doesn't even guarantee them a spot in the American Championship. This team has to win the rest of these games, which shouldn't be too difficult. Their win over North Texas was massive earlier in the season, and now the Bulls really just need to actively hate watch North Texas and Memphis. Looking at the betting odds, this conference, which is geared to send a team to the playoffs, is still wide open with 3 clear frontrunners. The group of 5 bid is more than likely going to be one of these teams unless James Madison has anything to say about it. JMU has been quietly dismantling the Sun Belt and looks poised to finish the season with their only loss coming to Louisville. The Sun Belt is decidedly weaker than the American Conference, but if schools like USF, Memphis, Tulane, and Navy start cannibalizing each other, the victor from that conference might just be weak enough for James Madison to be considered the best group of 5 champ. So there are the teams with a semblance of hope. Now it's time to talk about the teams in the depths of the prey category. LSU and Tennessee. God, even saying their names feels gross. Tennessee is somehow still ranked despite having 3 losses and a best win against either Kentucky or Arkansas, take your pick. LSU, on the other hand, fired all-time good guy Brian Kelly, and with both teams sitting on 3 losses, they have no more slack on their leash. They would both need to win out, and even then pray to the gods. Tennessee's best win would be Vandy if they went out, while LSU would actually have a solid win over Alabama. But if we're being honest, multiple teams toward the top would have to implode. Same story in the Big Ten with Illinois and Northwestern. Honestly, I'm just checking boxes at this point. Northwestern, with 2 Big Ten losses, can technically still make the Big Ten championship, and Illinois could, I guess, be an at-large bid, but I have a better chance of trying out and making the Lakers. Next, Kennesaw State. 2-loss Group of 5 team, undefeated in conference play, would have to win the Conference USA and have every other conference eat itself before championship week. That's all the breath I'll use on them. Tulane is at least interesting because they have a chance to win the American Conference. They would just need those 3 teams at the top to implode while winning out with a pretty difficult schedule. If they take down Memphis this weekend though, this team could get a whole lot more interesting. The final Group of 5 teams both come from the Mountain West: San Diego State and Boise State. San Diego State is seemingly the stronger of the 2 teams here, receiving some AP votes, but still behind Memphis and JMU. If both of those teams fall off though, San Diego State could be in a decent spot if they continue winning out west. Basically the same story for Boise State, although due to their weaker record, they would need a lot more to go wrong in those other conferences. And finally we get to the Big 12. Of course, it's the damn Big 12. This stupid conference was like untying the world's hardest knot last year, because at this point, basically every team was still in the running. Thankfully, it's a little simpler this time around, but there are still plenty of teams knocking around. TCU, Arizona State, and Houston. Houston had a ton of quiet victories, which were recently recognized with their first trip to the AP poll since 2022. And then they just shat the bed immediately on arrival against West Virginia. They're really here to just smile and wave, as their implied odds of winning the Big 12 are less than 1%. Arizona State has slightly better odds down here, but with 2 Big 12 losses, they would need to win out and see teams like BYU, Texas Tech, and Cincy fall. And lastly is TCU. They also need these same things to happen, but they can actually create a little bit of their own fate as they play BYU and Cincinnati. Wins there would make their path very possible, but again, they would still need more top-level teams to lose. So that wraps it up. 43 teams with a theoretical chance to squeeze their way into a 12-team playoff. Still a ridiculous amount up in the air, but we'll be back every week to see how things change in the last few weeks of the season. The key games I would pay close attention to this weekend in regards to the playoff picture are Oregon at Iowa, BYU at Texas Tech, Texas A&M at Missouri, and Alabama at LSU. Alright, I'm super pumped to be back for college football, and I've even been thinking of throwing together a website for people to play some daily college football trivia games, maybe post to forums, I don't really know. Let me know what you guys think of that, and I'll see you next week.